I never planned to stop on that deserted country lane, but the dog's whimper cut through the storm. Rain plastered his matted fur and ribs. My heart clenched at the sight. Logic screamed danger. Compassion doused every doubt. In that soaked moment, I became more than a passerby. I became his savior. The relentless downpour turned the world into a blur of gray and motion. My headlights carved two pale beams through sheets of rain, illuminating nothing but empty fields and the occasional dilapidated fence. The radio crackled with static, offering little comfort after 12 hours of back-breaking shift work at the factory. I felt every ache in my bones by the time I reached this lonely stretch of road, where even the moon hid behind swollen clouds. I was desperate to get home, to crawl into bed and let exhaustion claim me. Then, just beyond the shoulder, I heard it. The soft, urgent whimper of a creature in pain. I killed the engine and sat in the dark for a moment, heart thudding. The sound repeated, fragile yet insistent, and I realized it wasn't the wind or my overactive imagination. I sat up, scanned the downpour, and spotted a trembling form huddled beneath a broken wooden porch. Rain sluiced off its coat in rivulets, and every once in a while it lifted a muddy paw and trembled. Even before I climbed out into the storm, every rational warning flashed through my mind. A stray animal might be rabid. The property could belong to someone who wouldn't take kindly to trespassers, and the slick road could claim my life as easily as it had claimed my patience tonight. But none of that mattered when I saw the dog's ribs grinding with each shallow breath. Compassion surged, overriding fear. I grabbed my flashlight and waded through a foot of water and debris toward him. He was smaller than I'd imagined, perhaps a terrier mix, his fur once white, but now a dull, dirty gray. His eyes were dark wells of pain and confusion. I knelt a safe distance away, voice gentle despite the pounding in my chest. "Easy, boy. I'm here to help." He flinched at every drop of cold water that splashed him, but something in my voice must have reached him, because he didn't bolt. Instead, he tilted his head and met my gaze. The rain masked the tremor in his body, but I could see the warning flicker in his eyes. I unzipped my jacket and wrapped it around him, the fabric instantly soaked, but still offering warmth. He pressed against me, ribs jutting like broken stones, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I scooped him into my arms, knowing full well how slick he might be, and carried him back to the sedan. My clothes soaked through, and I shivered violently, but inside the car's dull red glow he curled against me, offering a tiny, exhausted wag of his tail. The nearest 24-hour vet was 15 minutes away, each second etched with worry. I peered in the rearview mirror, his eyes closed as if saving strength, but every exhalation rattled. At the Suez clinic, I burst through the doors, dragging him into the antiseptic corridor. Nurses and a vet tech sprang into action, cleaning wounds, administering an IV, and murmuring reassurances I barely heard. My chest tightened as they examined broken paws and inflamed skin. But when the vet finally smiled and said, "He's lucky you found him," relief washed over me in a tidal wave. I stayed until they stabilized him, filling out forms with trembling fingers. The dog's first tentative tail flick behind the exam curtain felt like a miracle. I promised the vet I'd care for him, even without knowing how. Driving away, I felt a spark of purpose ignite inside me, something I hadn't felt since I lost my mother years ago. This wounded creature had given me a mission. On the return journey, the rain eased to a steady drizzle. The dog, now wrapped in a fresh towel, pressed his head against the passenger seat, eyes grateful and trusting. I whispered promises of a warm bed and food. I thought of the lonely nights I'd spent staring at a bare ceiling, wondering if kindness still mattered in a hard world. Here was proof that it did. Back at the old man's porch, I knocked again, soaking wet and trembling. He opened the door as if expecting me, a frail figure in patched clothes. His eyes, sharp despite fatigue, gleamed with recognition. He reached into a pocket and produced a small tin of dog biscuits before greeting me by name. "Thank you," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "You did more than rescue him." He invited me inside, where the dim glow of an oil lamp revealed walls lined with faded photos, a younger version of himself in tailored suits, a smiling family gathering, and dozens of dogs, his life's companions. He sank onto a threadbare armchair and patted the seat beside him. The dog nestled at his feet. Safe at last. "You have a good heart," the old man said, staring into the lamp's flicker. "My name is Arthur Blackwood. I was once a wealthy man, but I've lived these years testing souls. You passed the first test." He produced an ornate key, its metal filigreed with a lion's crest. "This opens more than my safe. It opens the door to your future." My mind swirled. Inheritance, responsibility, a life I never imagined. Rain tapped against the window like an impatient audience. I felt the weight of Arthur's gaze and the key in my hand. Something profound shifted. My past struggles seemed distant, replaced by this single choice. I rose, heart pounding, and followed him into the warm glow of the room, dog at my heels. Outside, the night softened, the storm's fury spent. Inside, a new journey beckoned, and I stepped forward, unaware that the world I knew was about to be rewritten. Arthur guided me through a hidden side door into a grand library untouched by time, rows of gleaming books lining walls I never expected to see. He paused before a massive oak desk and placed the ornate key in my palm. "Tonight, at midnight," he whispered. "Come here alone and turn the key in the second lock." Thunder rumbled as he fell silent. My destiny lay behind that door, and my next breath would seal my fate. The next evening, a plain envelope lay on my doorstep. No return address, just my name. Inside, an elegant card reading, "Meet me at sunset, 47 Maple Avenue." My mind raced. Gratitude or grim trap? Curiosity and that old man's promise drove me out into the rain again. I stared at the envelope in my trembling hands as the December dusk deepened around me. The wind whipped stray leaves along the cracked concrete, and the street lamp overhead flickered through a curtain of raindrops. My clothes still smelled of wet fur and antiseptic from the vet's clinic, and every fiber of me ached for the warmth of home. Yet here I was, soaked again by a sudden downpour, debating whether to shred that card and retreat to safety. My fingers brushed the elegant script for the 100th time. "Meet me at sunset, 47 Maple Avenue." How did he know my address? Who else but the old man, Arthur, would care enough to send a handwritten invitation? But a warning voice in my head. He's not just any old man. Warred with the truth that he'd called me savior not 10 hours before. I bit my lip. If saving a stray dog had changed my life once, maybe I owed him this. Curiosity won out over caution, and I stepped into the rain. The bus stop was less than a mile away, but the ache in my legs made me slow step through puddles. When the rickety night bus arrived, its interior lights hummed sickly, and the lone passenger, an aged woman with a knitted shawl, gave me a curious look. Sitting there, I replayed the memory of Arthur's grateful eyes, the dog tucked safely in his arms. If he had secrets, they couldn't be darker than letting a man freeze to death beneath a porch. As the bus rattled through silent streets, streetlights stretching like sentinels, my heart drummed a nervous rhythm. At the final stop, I jumped off, the bus groaning away into the night. I stood on an empty boulevard, the rain flattening everything into gray silhouette. Far ahead loomed the wrought iron gates of Maple Avenue, their black paint gleaming wet under a pair of glowing lanterns. I hesitated, thoughts colliding in my skull. Maybe this is a trap. I have no right to know his secrets, but I owe him everything. The gates swung open at my footstep, as if inviting me into another world. A butler in a tailored black suit and white gloves waited under an arch of roses, their petals dark with rain. He inclined his head without a word, and led me across a courtyard, paved with cobblestones glistening like obsidian. My boots sloshed in shallow water, and the butler's shoes clicked on the stone like a metronome, marking each staccato beat of my nerves. Lanterns hanging from wrought iron posts cast soft pools of light, revealing ornate topiaries and a fountain centerpiece frozen in mid-splash. We reached a grand front door carved from dark mahogany. The butler pressed a hidden latch, and it swung open into a vast entry hall. My breath caught at the polished marble floor veined with gold, the sweeping staircase curling upward like a ribbon. Oil paintings in gilded frames lined the walls. Portraits of stern ancestors in lace collars, landscapes of distant estates, solemn gatherings that spoke of centuries of lineage. I swallowed, my fingers tightening around my soaked jacket. "Mr. Daniels?" the butler inquired, voice measured. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Yes." He inclined his head again, turned, and retreated into the gloom. I stepped forward, every sense stretched taut. Velvet drapes pooled at the floor, and a Persian rug quieted my footsteps as I ventured deeper. The only sound was my heart echoing off chandeliers hung high like constellations. Somewhere ahead, a crackling fire promised warmth I could scarcely imagine. At the far end, I found him. Arthur Blackwood, seated in a high-backed leather chair beside a roaring fireplace. His tattered overcoat lay draped over one arm of a chaise lounge, revealing beneath it a tailored velvet waistcoat and satin cravat. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his face bore the lines of age, but lit by a sharp, almost mischievous sparkle in his eyes. He smiled as I approached, an expression of relief and something deeper, like pride. He patted the seat across from him. "Come in, Jack." I closed the distance, each footstep accentuating the hush. At last I stood before him. "You asked for me." His gentle nod set my nerves ablaze. I did. "Please dry yourself by the fire." He extended a trembling hand toward a polished mahogany valet. "Coat, please." I loosened my collar and hung my jacket on the valet's hook, shaking out the sodden fabric. The fire's warmth seared the chill from my bones. The dog, now wrapped in a spare blanket, padded out from a side corridor and leapt onto my lap. He nestled against me, tail thumping a soft rhythm that felt like home. Arthur chuckled softly. "He misses you, you know." I stroked the dog's head, voice thick. "I made sure he was safe." Arthur leaned forward, fingers steepled. "And in doing so, you saved much more." He paused, as though weighing each word. "There is a legacy tied to that gesture, a responsibility that only someone with your heart could bear." I blinked, mind spinning. Legacy. He stood with surprising strength for one so frail and removed the coat that concealed his finer clothes. The velvet waistcoat's gold threads shimmered in the firelight, and I caught sight of his polished cufflinks, tiny lions carved in solid gold. "I am no pauper, Jack. My exterior was a test. Now that you've shown me your character, I can trust you with the truth." He swept an arm toward a heavy oak desk, topped with an ornate key resting on a crimson velvet cushion. The key's intricate bow, crafted in the shape of a lion's head, gleamed as if alive. "This key opens my family's vault, but more importantly, it unlocks your future." I strained to absorb it all. His hidden wealth, the test of compassion, the promise of inheritance. My chest tightened as the enormity of his offer settled in. I thought of my cramped apartment, my unpaid rent, the lonely nights spent staring at the ceiling. Now I could change everything, not just for me, but for every forgotten soul like that dog. Arthur's gaze held mine, unblinking. "At midnight, come here alone and use this key in the second lock on my desk. Then you will truly understand what I have to offer and what I expect in return." He replaced the coat, and the fire crackled, as though eager to witness this pact. My pulse thundered. I don't know what to say." He smiled and gestured toward a raised tea trolley. "Words matter less than deeds." Rest now. At midnight, begin your destiny." His tone was both command and benediction. I gathered the key, its weight both comforting and daunting. The dog nuzzled my side, thirsty for the warmth of home. I rose, voice small but certain. "Thank you, Arthur." He inclined his head, cloak swirling. "Good luck, Jack. And recall that every chapter you write from here on must honor the kindness that brought you here." I stepped back into the storm, key burning in my pocket, its metal warmth a promise of change. Midnight approached like a judge's gavel, echoing in my mind with each passing hour. Would I be worthy of the wealth and responsibility he offered? As the manor's windows dimmed, I realized my life's path had bent irreversibly, and the true test awaited. Candlelight danced on his silvered hair as he opened a secret compartment in his desk. A cascade of gold coins and dusty ledgers tumbled into view, glinting like buried stars. "My wealth has been hidden to test true character," he confessed, eyes gleaming with quiet pride. "And you passed the first test by saving that dog." The room fell into a hushed reverence as the wooden lid slid away, revealing a treasure that seemed plucked from legend rather than reality. My breath caught in my throat. Every coin bore a stamp, fine filigree of lions, roses, and swirling vines, proof of centuries-old craftsmanship. Leather-bound ledgers lay stacked beside the coins, their pages yellowed and brittle, inked in spidery handwriting that chronicled fortunes built and lost. Heat from the fireplace cast golden ripples across the polished oak floor, making the entire trove shimmer in the lamplit gloom. Arthur leaned back in his chair, the flicker of candlelight highlighting the deep lines etched by time and experience on his weathered face. He clasped his hands, fingers brushing a jagged scar that told stories of its own. "My family's fortune," he began, voice low and measured, "was amassed not through ruthless acquisition, but through compassion. Generations of Blackwoods have used these coins to feed the hungry, heal the sick, and rebuild villages ravaged by war and hardship." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silence. I found my voice at last. "Why hide it? Why live as a pauper?" His laugh was soft, but carried the resonance of regret and relief mingled. "Because kindness offered freely is worthless if one's motives are tainted by greed." I donned rags to see who would care for a stray dog without thought of reward. I needed an heir who would act on character, not entitlement. He gestured at the ledgers. "These scrolls list every anonymous act of goodwill. Sacks of grain left at doorsteps, crucibles of medicine dispatched to remote clinics, interest-free loans that saved entrepreneurs. Every entry is a vow kept by my forebears." My pulse pounded as I imagined the significance, the quiet heroism of past generations, hidden from public acclaim, yet shaping lives in unseen ways. A swirl of guilt and honor settled in my gut. I, too, had lived hand to mouth, never expecting to inherit anything beyond memories of hard work. Yet here I stood, on the brink of a destiny forged by empathy rather than ambition. Arthur rose and retrieved one of the ledgers, opening it to a page bearing my name in elegant script. My eyes blurred over the words. Jack Daniels, rescuer of the faithful stray, first successor candidate. Beneath it, a series of stipulations: maintenance of charitable foundations, oversight of community projects, and the promise to commit oneself wholly to service. The realization washed over me. My simple act by the roadside had thrust me into a legacy centuries in the making. He produced an ornate contract from a velvet-lined drawer. Its edges were gilded, the cover stamped in gold leaf with the Blackwood crest. I reached out, trembling, and felt the parchment's smooth coolness under my fingertips. I peered at the clauses shimmering in the hearth's glow. Some I recognized: stewardship of trust funds, quarterly reviews of philanthropic initiatives, legal guardianship of a network of orphanages and rural clinics. Others delved deeper, requiring personal involvement in crisis response, travel to famine-stricken regions, and discretion in handling the family's private archives. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized that accepting this inheritance would bind me irrevocably to a life of service, luxuries and comforts sacrificed on the altar of compassion. The dog's grateful eyes flashed in my memory, and I felt that same surge of purpose ignite once more. I looked up to meet Arthur's steady gaze. "You understand," he said softly, voice barely above a whisper, "that signing this pact binds you to a lifetime of selflessness. There is no undoing this commitment." I drew a deep breath, the scent of leather and candle wax filling my lungs. Uncertainty twisted like barbed vines in my mind. Could I bear such responsibility? What of my own dreams, my simple hopes? Yet every fiber of my being resonated with the injustice of suffering left unaddressed. If this was the price of making a lasting difference, then I would pay it gladly. With a resolve I barely recognized as my own, I lifted the pen, its silver handle cool and smooth, and poised it above the signature line. The candle sputtered, and for a moment the room plunged into darkness before the flame steadied. My hand shook as I inscribed my name, each letter a vow more binding than any chain. The ink seeped into the paper like blood spilled for a cause greater than self. As the pen clicked shut, a profound silence enveloped us. Then Arthur exhaled slowly, the tension dissolving from his shoulders. He extended his hand, and I placed the signed contract into it. He cradled it as though it were the family's most precious heirloom, which it was. He nodded, a gentle smile creasing his face. "Welcome to our legacy, Jack." He tapped the ledgers, his voice soft but firm. "Tomorrow we begin your induction. First a visit to the orphan's haven on the south side. Lives hang in the balance there." My heart thundered with anticipation and trepidation. "I'm ready," I said, voice steady, although my pulse raced. "Tell me what to do." Arthur stood and beckoned me toward the window. Outside, rain had ceased, and the horizon glowed faintly with dawn's promise. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch firm and reassuring. "Good. We move at first light." He paused as the first bird call broke the silence. "Remember, and never forget, that the smallest act of kindness can reshape the world." The candle flickered as I gathered the ledgers and keys, mind racing with the breadth of my new duties. Arthur's silhouette against the window seemed both mentor and gatekeeper to an uncertain future. Outside, the manor's gardens lay bathed in pre-dawn mist, my first destination beckoning quietly. As I stepped toward the door, he called softly, "One more thing. Prepare for a trial. No ledger can record." Before dawn, I stood shivering at the orphanage gates with Arthur's brass key heavy in my palm. The world still slept, but in my hand lay the power to unlock hope. Inside, tiny fists pounded against weathered wood, frantic for warmth and comfort. I paused. This was my first command of real consequence. The iron gates groaned as I eased them open, the ancient lock turning with a reluctant click under Arthur's ornate key. Night's final breath whispered through broken windows, and I felt the weight of centuries of expectation settle onto my shoulders. The orphanage stood silent, except for the soft drone of early alarms, heaters sputtering to life, and my own ragged breathing. Cold drafts slid down my jacket, carrying the faint scent of mildew and old despair. Inside, the corridor stretched before me like a tunnel through time. Flickering fluorescent, bulbs cast a pallid glow over cracked plaster walls and floorboards warped by water damage. Empty cots lined each side, blankets gone thin with wear and age. I winced at the sight of dusty toys, a single cracked porcelain doll, a wooden train frozen mid-track, silent relics of childhood abandoned. The hush pressed against my ears until I feared I might shatter it with a rogue breath. I clutched my satchel, heart pounding. Arthur's instructions echoed in my mind. Use the provisions I've stored here. Blankets, food, new shoes. Today, you write the first page of your legacy. I knelt and found the hidden panel beneath a loose floorboard, the wood splintering under my fingers. There lay canvas packs, sealed jars of stew, care packages of socks and shoes, everything needed to banish hunger and cold. Each package bore a simple insignia, the Blackwood lion crest pressed into wax. I imagined the hands of those long gone who had packed these goods with trembling hope. A distant clatter startled me, the sound of little feet and flapping cloth. From the shadows emerged gaunt children in threadbare garments, their wide eyes flickering between fear and wonder. I cleared my throat softly. I'm here to help. They hesitated at the edge of light, faces smeared with soot and tears. A tiny boy, no more than 5, clutched his tattered teddy bear and took a cautious step forward. I smiled, a clumsy attempt at comfort, and waved him closer. It's okay. I have blankets and food for all of you. In a flurry, they spilled forward, girls with hair tied in ragged bows, boys with knees puckered and patched, their smiles shy but radiant. I knelt again, opening the first canvas pack and pulling out a thick wool blanket. Its fibers were soft and new, an extravagance I'd never known, and I wrapped it around the smallest girl, her eyes widening as warmth spread over her shoulders. She hugged me, pressing her cheek to my side, and in that instant I felt the hollow ache in my chest ease. "Who are you?" a voice piped up, one of the older children, a lanky teenager with solemn eyes. I glanced at each of them, skeletal arms, hollow cheeks, yet an undercurrent of fierce resilience gleaming behind those young gazes. "My name is Jack," I said softly. "Arthur asked me to help. He's a good man." I rummaged for cartons of stew, thick with potatoes and meat, and ladled it into chipped enamel bowls, passing them from small hand to small hand. Steam curled into the frigid air, carrying a promise of nourishment. The children's tentative slurps grew bold as hunger drove fear away. I handed out shoes next, sturdy leather pairs laced with fresh strings. One by one, they kicked off threadbare socks and slid into soft new footwear. Gasps of delight echoed off the peeling walls. For a fleeting moment, the orphanage felt less like a prison and more like a home. As I moved among them, my own sorrow and pride warred within me. Pride that I could ease their suffering, sorrow that this place existed at all, where children glimpsed hope only once a generation when a stranger arrived with gifts. My hands trembled as I met their eyes, oceans of trust and unmet needs reflected in fragile pupils. Near the back of the hall, I noticed a sliver of torn wallpaper clinging to a damp patch. Scrawled in childish scrawl was one word: Successor. My breath caught. Had Arthur left that message for me? Or had some child already sensed this place's deeper purpose? My heart raced as I considered that my arrival here was more than a charity run. It was the first decree in a lineage of compassion stretching back centuries. Soft footsteps sounded behind me. I turned, blanketing a trembling child, to find Arthur framed in the doorway. His eyes shone with approval, the firelight dancing across his lined face. He applauded so gently I almost missed it. The children fell silent, gazes flicking between us as though witnessing a secret ceremony. He beckoned me closer. In his hand, he held a sealed envelope the size of an invitation card, its wax emblem bearing the family crest. He extended it with a nod. "Your next trial lies beyond the city gates, at the old waterworks. There you will test whether your compassion can give life where it has long been forgotten." My chest constricted at the thought of deeper challenges, but beneath that constriction bloomed determination. The children stared up at me, eyes bright with unanswered questions and new trust. I could not fail them. I dusted off my hands, voice steady. "I'll be there at first light." Arthur's faint smile was as warm as the blankets I'd given the orphans. "Good. Rest now. Tomorrow you carry hope to another doorstep." He turned and receded into the shadows, leaving me alone with the children's whispered thanks and the soft drip of the leaking roof. I gathered the empty bowls and blankets, fitting each child with a fresh crumb of comfort. Their laughter, tentative and fragile, echoed down the corridors, turning broken halls into corridors of promise. I pressed my hand to the worn key hanging from my neck, its brass warmth a constant reminder of the legacy entrusted to me. Outside, the sky still dark, the orphanage gates closed behind me with a gentle click. The rain had ceased, leaving only damp earth underfoot and the faint echo of children's dreams trailing in my wake. I looked down at the sealed envelope in my hand, its weight promising a journey I could scarcely imagine. As I raised my gaze to the horizon, dawn's first light threatened the night's shadows, illuminating the ancient waterworks in the distance. Arthur's voice crackled from my coat pocket. "Remember, this trial will test your resourcefulness as much as your heart." I slipped the envelope into my pocket, key clinking against it like a heartbeat. One final look back at the orphanage's silent windows, and I set off, my destiny unfolding, beyond the city gates. Under a silvered moon, I slipped into the city archives, vault doors yawning behind me. Dust motes drifted through my flashlight's beam as I approached the founder's ledger. Its pages held the true history of our empire and my bloodline. I couldn't turn back now. Every secret demanded discovery. The corridor smelled of aged paper and polished stone, redolent with the hush of centuries. My boots echoed softly on marble floors as I navigated a labyrinth of filing cabinets and steel shelves, every aisle stacked to the ceiling with leather-bound volumes. Outside, the city's heartbeat lay muffled beneath the vault's thick walls. Even the night wind seemed to wait in respectful silence. In this subterranean sanctuary of memory, I felt both small and weighty. Small amid the tides of history, weighty with the promise of revelation. My heart hammered when I reached the great vault door, a circular portal of reinforced steel, wheel lock embossed with the Blackwood lion crest. I set my flashlight on the floor, leveling its cone of light at the intricate tumbler mechanism. My fingers trembled as I produced the slender picks Arthur had given me, tools that felt incongruous in a hand still raw from orphanage labor. Each click of the lock's tumblers rang in the hush like a gunshot. I paused at the final pin, breath hitching, then felt the satisfying give as the mechanism surrendered. The heavy door groaned open, revealing a sanctum of records lit by a single slit of moonlight from a narrow skylight above. Inside, stillness reigned. Dust motes shimmered in the pale beam as my flashlight danced across rows of ledgers wrapped in fading silk. Volumes chronicling decades of Blackwood philanthropy, legal decrees, and private correspondence. At the center of the room, on a pedestal carved from oak, lay the founder's personal journal, leather-bound, scarred by time, clasped with a tarnished silver latch. I crossed the space in slow, reverent steps, every nerve taut with anticipation. With a soft click, I undid the latch and unfurled the first pages. The inked script curled in elegant loops, the founder's own hand, recounting the empire's birth in a small village devastated by drought and disease. He wrote of miracles wrought by secret shipments of grain, organized by moonlight, and sudden rains invoked by communal prayer and covert resources. The journal's entries were raw, sometimes written in trembling scrawl. "We have bread today, tomorrow we carry hope, and those who give in secret shall be blessed in public." Each line breathed with compassion that seemed almost legendary. I turned pages, heart racing, until a ribboned scrap of parchment fell free, fluttering like a trapped bird. It listed names, villagers, merchants, even a schoolteacher in a distant county, people who had never known the hands that saved them. Then my breath caught. Toward the bottom, in a smaller, newer hand, was my grandfather's name, Daniel Blackwood Daniels, followed by a notation. Anonymous supply of winter blankets, 1974. My grandfather, he who'd vanished when I was a child, had quietly continued the family's charitable legacy, hidden behind my mother's morning smile. A storm of emotion battered me. Pride, sorrow, guilt. I'd grown up never knowing his kindness except in whispered family legend. Here it was in black and white, proof that his heart matched the founder's. The moral weight pressed on me like the vault's solid walls. To hold this knowledge was to shoulder the hope of generations. I pressed my hand to the next volume, a ledger marked Disbursements and Deeds. It bulged with documents, wills, land grants, letters from grateful recipients, each page a testament to lives changed by clandestine generosity. I realized that the Blackwood fortune was not merely gold and property, but the living legacy of lost souls made whole. Careful not to disturb the others, I slipped the founder's journal and the parchment into my coat's inner pocket. Every second I stayed, the risk of discovery grew. Yet I paused, tracing the crest of the journal's cover and whispering a promise. I will honor you both. The echo of my vow lingered in the vault's hush. Footsteps, soft at first, then forming a rhythmic pattern, snapped my head up. My flashlight beam wavered. At the door stood a lanky archivist, his silhouette framed by the vault's rim of light. He raised a finger to his lips, eyes sharp beneath his spectacles, and mouthed, "The master knows you're here." My heart thundered. I swallowed hard as he stepped aside, gesturing toward a corridor leading deeper into the archives. "He's waiting in the south wing," the archivist whispered. A tremor of fear tangled with my resolve. Had I crossed the line from heir to interloper? I pressed my hand to my coat pocket, feeling the journal's reassuring bulk. Every secret I had uncovered demanded acknowledgement. I drew a steadying breath, squared my shoulders, and followed the archivist into the darkness, aware that my next steps would define not just my destiny, but the future of an entire legacy. The corridor's lanterns flickered as I followed the archivist's silent steps, each footfall echoing like a verdict. At the south wing's heavy door, the archivist paused and whispered, "No turning back." I touched the journals to steady my hand, heart pounding with equal measures of dread and resolve. Beyond that door lay Arthur's final secret, and the truth I must embrace to claim my rightful place. At dawn's first light, I stood before an abandoned well, vines coiling like serpents around its crumbling stone walls. The ivory compass Arthur entrusted me quivered in my palm, its needle dancing between dawn's colors and the well's yawning darkness. "Dig deeper than gold," his words echoed through my mind, a summons to uncover more than treasure. With lantern in hand, I braced myself and plunged into the cold void below. The air grew chillier as I descended the rusted iron ladder into the well's moss-slick shaft. My lantern's golden beam carved a narrow path through damp stone, illuminating dripping mineral stains and patches of mildew. Each rung groaned under my weight, but I steadied myself against the slick wall, recalling every lesson Arthur had imparted. Patience, respect for history, and unwavering compassion. The compass hummed against my chest, a reminder that this guided me not by magnetism, but by purpose. At the bottom, the floor was slick with shallow water. I hesitated, the lantern's glow reflecting in ripples at my feet. Kneeling, I untied the coil of rope strapped to my belt and secured it to an iron ring embedded in the wall. My heart pounded as I unspooled the lantern's chain, lowering it until its wick flickered just above the waterline. Shadows danced across arched corridors branching off into darkness. I surveyed the tunnel network, walls etched with age-worn carvings, patterns of vines, water droplets, and hands clasping wheat sheaves. These glyphs mirrored the Blackwood coat of arms. I recognized them from my grandfather's scrolls. I ventured down the leftmost tunnel, each step splashing through ankle-deep pools. My lantern's light caught tattered scroll cases tucked into alcoves carved halfway up the walls. Kneeling, I pried one free, a clay jar sealed with wax bearing the Blackwood crest. My breath caught as I cracked the seal. Inside lay brittle scrolls, yellowing with age, tied with faded ribbons. I unfurled the first, villagers' prayers for rain, transcribed by candlelight in shaky script. One entry read, "When crops withered, my family starved. Then came the Blackwoods in silence, leaving water drawn from this well." Another recounted children's laughter echoing through empty fields once the well's waters returned. I realized these scrolls were testimonials, proof that every act of charity Arthur's ancestors had performed resonated far beyond ledgers and bank accounts. Next, I discovered clay jars half buried in silt. Their lids snapped free with a soft crack, revealing small nuggets of turquoise and rose quartz. Vessels filled not with gems, but with dried spring water pearls. Each bead, when rehydrated, transformed into a drop of pure mountain spring. The jar's labels bore simple instructions. Distribute to those who cannot reach the stream. I tucked 2 jars into my pack, knowing these precious waters could revive parched throats in drought-stricken villages. As I moved deeper, the musty scent of earth and mold mingled with the lantern's smoky incense. My mind replayed the orphanage's needs and the refugees at the well, hands outstretched, trembling in famine's grip. The weight of their suffering pressed on me, sharpening my resolve. This trial was not about uncovering gold, but rediscovering the wells of compassion that nourished generations long forgotten. At a fork in the corridor, I paused before a rusted gate inscribed with a single word: legacy. Beyond lay a smaller chamber, lit by a shaft of pre-dawn light spilling from above. In its center stood a stone basin, carved with floral motifs and inscriptions in archaic script. I approached and pressed my palm to the carved basin rim. The inscriptions read, "He who brings life from depth shall inherit the well of souls." I felt a surge of destiny coursing through my veins. Kneeling beside the basin, I poured the rehydrated water from the jars into its hollow. The droplets rippled across the stone, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw faint carvings glow. Whether illusion or magic, I couldn't tell, but the moment resonated like a vow fulfilled. I placed the scrolls atop the basin and whispered, "Your stories will be heard again." I turned to leave with the original testimonials clutched to my chest. The corridor walls felt warmer, as if imbued with hope's echo. My lantern's light flickered. The rope had burned too close to the lamp's chain. I unhooked it hastily, tying the end to my belt once more. I climbed the ladder, each rung a jolt of anticipation and triumph. The well's mouth yawned above like a portal to both past and future. Pulling myself free into the cold dawn air, I blinked against the sudden brightness. The vines that once strangled the well's stone had parted slightly, revealing freshly watered earth below. I gasped as I saw small green shoots pushing through the soil, proof that a single act could spark new life. The horizon blushed with sunrise, painting the abandoned courtyard in rose and gold. Under the arbor's twisted grapevines, Arthur awaited, his silhouette framed by burgeoning greenery. He clasped my shoulder, eyes misting with pride. Before I could speak, he reached into his coat and pressed a faded, creased parchment into my hand. Its edges frayed, its ink smudged by time. "Now you own our legacy. Take this map to its heart," he murmured. The parchment bore winding roots and cryptic symbols leading far beyond any road I'd traveled. I traced the lines with my fingertip, breath catching at the sheer scale of what lay ahead. Mountains, rivers, and distant villages sprawled across the page, each marked with tiny icons of wells, granaries, and crossroads. My pulse thundered as I folded the map and tucked it into my pack. How many more trials awaited? How deep did this responsibility reach? Arthur's smile was both gentle and knowing. "Every well you restore," he said, "every life you save will keep our promise alive." He placed a hand on my other shoulder. "Go now. The world needs its next steward." I stared at the map's sprawling roots as Arthur's words echoed in the courtyard's new dawn light. Dozens of villages awaited salvation, their futures curled in those faded lines. My heart thrummed with purpose, and the weight of every life depending on me. Steeling my resolve, I stepped forward, lantern and compass ready, toward the path that would define my legacy. 3 trails unfurled beneath a bruised twilight sky, each cloaked in rumor and ancient warning. The ivory compass trembled in my palm, its needle flicking wildly between roots. Arthur's decree echoed, "Choose the path of greatest need." I inhaled the mountain air, thin, cold, and charged, and stepped forward, courage quivering at the world's thresholds. I stood at the mountain's fork, the wind tearing at my coat and carrying whispers of distant storms. Before me lay 3 divergent paths, each traced by legends older than memory. To the left, a winding forest trail descended into verdant valleys, promising safety, but rumored to skirt starving hamlets forgotten by the world. Straight ahead, a gentle ridge led to fertile plains, breadbasket fields that had once fed millions but now lay fallow, victims of drought and blight. To the right, a jagged pass climbed toward snow-capped peaks where an ancient temple stood, a place of pilgrimage said to house relics of boundless healing, accessible only to those who risked life and limb. I unrolled Arthur's faded parchment under the flicker of my lantern, its symbols blazing with ink that refused to fade. Each line on the map bore an icon, a loaf of bread for the plains, a droplet for the valleys, and a lotus for the temple. My heart pounded as I traced the strokes with a trembling finger. The compass needle spun, refusing to rest, as if testing my resolve. I recalled Arthur's stern voice. "Fortune favors those who serve where need is greatest, not where ease abounds." Memories surged. My childhood in a cramped apartment, nights when the rent gobbled our meals, a teacher who shared her lunch when my pocket was empty. Compassion had saved me before I ever heard the Blackwood name. Now I had to decide where my help would matter most. Each path loomed with equal stakes: the hungry plains, the desolate valleys, or the temple's promise. The shadows deepened, and frost gathered on the rocks beneath my boots. I exhaled slowly, letting the mountain air fill my lungs. My feet moved almost of their own accord toward the rightmost path, the one that ascended. I chose the temple because legend held that its relics, drawn from the founder's own efforts, could multiply water into healing springs or turn barren fields green. If I could reach that sanctuary, the rewards would ripple across every other need. Vulnerable hamlets and drought-stricken plains would follow. The climb began with rocky switchbacks, the lantern's beam skimming the edge of sheer drops. Loose stones clattered underfoot, threatening to send me careening into oblivion. My palms stung as I grasped outcroppings for balance, every muscle screaming. The compass, now quiet, pointed unwaveringly toward the temple's silhouette, etched against the darkening sky. I stuffed the map back into my pack and pressed on. As the path steepened, the temperature plunged. My breath came in ragged puffs, each exhale icing my beard. A hush settled over the mountain, no bird song, no rustle of deer, only the whisper of wind through jagged crags. Above me, the temple's spire glowed faintly, torches flickering like beacons in the distance. I tightened my scarf and reminded myself of the orphans, the starving farmers, the thirsty villagers, faces I carried in my mind's eye. Their silent prayers spurred me upward. Hours passed in a trance of effort and endurance. I paused only to drain a canteen of cold water and nibble on dried fruit, savoring its sweetness, like a gift. My legs trembled as altitude claimed strength, but I forced each step. At one point I found myself staring down a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. My stomach lurched, but I edged along the narrow ledge, eyes fixed on a handhold shaped like a lion's claw, etched centuries ago by temple guardians. I touched it reverently, feeling a surge of ancestral strength course through me. Finally, I rounded the last bend into a stony courtyard, ringed by sculpted arches. The temple stood before me, ancient stone walls carved with reliefs of healing waters and embracing hands, their details softened by time, yet still stirring awe. A grand entry arch soared overhead, its keystone shaped as an outstretched hand offering a lotus blossom. I paused at its threshold, lantern raised, heart drumming in my ears. The air here tasted of incense and ancient chants, as though the spirits of past healers lingered in the stones. Torchlight flickered within the sanctuary, revealing a vast hall lined with stone statues. Each statue depicted a benefactor, robed figures pouring water into vessels, their eyes cast downward in humble service. I stepped forward onto the mosaic floor, an intricate tapestry of tiles forming a map of every famine-stricken region the Blackwoods had once aided. The colors of the tiles, a swirl of ochre, blue, and emerald, shone in the lantern's glow. At the room's center lay a raised plinth holding an ornate reliquary, carved from ivory and silver. I approached with caution, aware that this was the culmination of Arthur's trials. The reliquary's lid bore the Blackwood crest, a lion's head surrounded by vines. I lifted it carefully. Inside rested 3 small vials, one filled with crystalline water, another with seeds pressed between parchment, and a final empty vessel marked by a single lotus petal. A plaque at the base read, "He who dares to uplift the suffering shall unlock the earth's renewal." My breath caught. The first vial, spring water unfrozen, could restore life to parched lands. The seeds could regrow crops in barren soil. The empty vessel awaited something I had yet to earn, the heart of true compassion. Raising the vial of water to my lips, I tasted its cool purity. Instinct told me to pour it outside, to let the mountain drink, but Arthur's words whispered, "Serve with intent, not spectacle." I tucked the vial safely in my pack for distribution. Beyond the plinth, a side door beckoned. Carved with runes I recognized from the orphanage's inscriptions. I realized that retrieving these relics was only half the test. To prove my heart, I had to bring their blessings to those who needed them most. My mind flashed to the forgotten well, the orphanage, the famine victims. I was their conduit now. A sudden crack echoed through the hall as my earpiece crackled to life with Arthur's voice, low and urgent. "You've made it, Jack. Now prove your heart here. The next path lies not in stone, but in action." My pulse spiked. Statues of stone guardians, life-sized figures wielding staffs topped with lotus carvings, seemed to shift in the torchlight, as if awaiting commands. I took a step forward, lantern held high, toward the nearest guardian. The mosaic beneath my boots glowed faintly, mapping a secret route. Beyond these walls, the tiles suggested. I recognized the symbol for the ravaged plains, etched as a droplet intersecting with wheat, just beyond the western exit. The paths I'd forsaken earlier now converged here. I realized my choice was not a one-time act, but an ongoing journey across every need. I steadied my breathing and ran a hand over the nearest guardian's plinth, sending a thrill through my fingers. "I accept," I whispered into the hush. In that instant, the runes glowed softly, and a panel in the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. The reliquary's vials shimmered in my pack. The seeds promised regrowth. The empty vessel beckoned to be filled with my next act of service. I stepped through the arch, lantern smoke curling as I crossed the threshold from myth into destiny. My last glance back showed the statues standing sentinel, their stone eyes reflecting the torchlight, and somehow confidence in my resolve. The passage's shadows swallowed my lantern's glow as Arthur's voice crackled once more. "Go now, Jack. Deliver hope where none remains." My compass in one hand, reliquary in the other, I descended into the darkness toward the world beyond these sacred halls. Behind me, the temple's arches faded into silence, guardians of compassion left in stone and memory. Ahead lay the ravaged plains, hungry, thirsty, awaiting the dawn of renewal drawn from my hands. The rusted iron gate groaned like it was waking from a century-long slumber. The mansion beyond stood like a forgotten monument. Cracked windows, twisted ivy, and a silence thick enough to hear my own breath. Beside me, the old man gripped the dog's leash with one hand and clutched his chest with the other. "This place," he whispered, his voice shaking, "was built from dreams and destroyed by blood." I stepped out of the car with caution, my boots crunching against the loose gravel of a path that hadn't been tended in decades. A strange heaviness hung in the air, one that made each breath feel like inhaling a memory. The overgrown hedges around us bent under the weight of time, like they too were mourning something long gone. The old man walked ahead of me, slowly, his back hunched but his movements deliberate. There was a tremor in his fingers as he reached out and touched the gate. The moment his palm made contact with the rusted metal, the wind picked up slightly, as if the house had sensed his return. I watched in stunned silence as he pushed the gate open with surprising strength. The screech of iron on stone sliced through the silence like a warning bell. What stood ahead was not a house. It was a monument of forgotten glory. Vines strangled its balconies, and shattered glass glinted faintly in the dim afternoon light. A grand staircase curled around the front facade like an invitation to judgment. Something about the architecture told me this wasn't just old. It was historic. I felt as if I'd just walked into the final chapter of someone's epic life. He paused at the foot of the front stairs, staring up at the structure with eyes filled with emotion. "I built this with the belief that love could last forever," he murmured. "Turns out, wealth lasts longer." The dog pulled ahead, ears perked, tail wagging slightly as it recognized familiar ground. It trotted toward the door, and the old man followed, fishing out a small brass key from a pouch hidden beneath his coat. I could barely see for the layers of cobwebs covering the front porch. With a shaky hand, he inserted the key, turned it once, and the lock gave way. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of musty air that smelled of old books, extinguished candles, and sealed secrets. I hesitated on the threshold, unsure whether to follow him into the darkness or let him go alone. But the dog looked back at me once, its eyes wide and almost pleading. So, I stepped in. Inside, the world was gray and gold, dust dancing in shafts of light from broken stained-glass windows, cobwebs spun like delicate drapery, and silence as dense as fog. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, still intact, but long dark. The floors were made of intricate wood patterns, worn and split in places, but beautiful. The hallway opened into a large sitting room. Faded portraits lined the walls. Men and women I didn't recognize, dressed in outdated but regal fashion. Their painted eyes seemed to follow us. The old man stopped in front of one of the portraits, a woman in a dark blue gown with a serene smile. He touched the frame gently. "My wife," he said, voice hollow. "She died hating me for what this house did to us." He led me through a narrow hallway into a library, where bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Some had collapsed under their own weight. Others were still neatly stacked, as if frozen in time. The center of the room held a massive oak desk. He walked behind it, opened a drawer, and retrieved a sealed envelope and a photograph. My hand trembled as he passed it to me. It was me, taken just a few weeks ago, kneeling beside the stray dog outside the shelter. "I've been watching you," he said, "not because I needed a rescuer, but because I needed a replacement." My knees weakened, and I sat down heavily in the cracked leather armchair. He continued, "Everyone who knew I had money tried to impress me, manipulate me, or disappear when they couldn't. But you stopped for a dying animal without knowing anyone was watching. That's all I needed to know." I stared at the envelope in my lap. On the front, my name was handwritten in looping cursive. Inside was a document, a legal transfer of power, wealth, and legacy, estates, stocks, land, and responsibilities, all of it. My name wasn't listed as a beneficiary. It was listed as the successor. "You can say no," he said almost gently. "But if you accept, This house, this name, and this responsibility becomes yours. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mind raced. I was just a guy who cleaned cages and handed out food at an animal shelter. I never wore suits. I never shook hands with lawyers. But I'd stumbled into something vast and hollow, a legacy shaped by grief and silence, now resting at my feet. "I don't want your money," I finally said. He smiled faintly. "Good. I don't want someone who does." We climbed the stairs next, each step groaning as if recognizing his weight again. Upstairs was colder, darker. Dust clung to every surface. In one room, the furniture was covered in white sheets, like ghosts protecting their secrets. But in another, frames lined a dusty shelf, a boy and the dog as a puppy, a woman laughing in a garden, a family dressed in formal black. "I lost them all," he said. "First my son, then my wife, and finally, my reason." He opened a chest at the end of the hall and took out a small box. Inside were journals, some photographs, and a letter marked with a wax seal. "This one isn't for you," he said. "It's for someone I failed a long time ago." "Someone I want you to find," I nodded slowly, unsure of what I was agreeing to. Every part of me was trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of being chosen. We returned to the ground floor. Rain had begun to fall, gentle and rhythmic. The sound of it tapping against the broken windows filled the silence like a metronome. He lit a small fire in the hearth. The dog curled beside it, clearly at home. I sat across from him, the sealed letter still in my lap, my head spinning with questions. "You don't have to fix what I broke," he said, staring into the flames. "But maybe you can make something new from what's left." His voice broke slightly. "This house doesn't need an heir. It needs a heartbeat." He rose slowly, joints cracking, and walked to a drawer built into the fireplace mantel. From within, he pulled out a faded photo, a young woman holding the dog, smiling, her other hand shielding her eyes from the sun. "She left before I could ask her forgiveness," he said, placing the photo in my hand. Then he looked into my eyes and whispered, "I think she might be your mother." The storm outside raged louder, but it was nothing compared to the silence that crashed over me inside. The mist was so thick I could barely see my hands, yet I kept climbing, each step heavier than the last. Carved into the stone beneath my feet were words I'd never seen, but somehow already knew. Our family creed. From service, strength. Above me, the wind roared like a living thing, challenging my presence on sacred ground. And below, beyond the cloud veil, hundreds of eyes waited to hear if I had truly become the heir they needed. I reached the final ledge with shaking knees, my breath shallow in the cold air, and placed both palms on the ancient platform to steady myself. The spire rose behind me like a monument carved by the will of the mountain itself, twisting upward in jagged lines, every inch of it chiseled with creeds, promises, warnings. I ran my fingers across a line etched in fading script. "Speak not as a master, but as a mirror." The words struck me. I wasn't here to rule over anyone. I was here to reflect what they needed. My coat clung to me, soaked at the shoulders from the mist that hadn't lifted since morning. The wind cut through the fabric like needles. But when I turned to face the edge of the platform, my breath caught, not from cold, but from awe. Through breaks in the cloud cover, I could see them. The courtyard far below was filled beyond its stone boundaries. People stood shoulder to shoulder, workers in tattered clothes, elders with their hands clasped in reverence, farmers holding their hats to their chests. Soldiers stood unarmed, their uniforms mismatched and faded, some still carrying the scars of old wars. And among them, children sat on shoulders, eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and something purer, belief. At the center of it all stood the old man, silent and still as a statue. The dog was beside him, tail wagging faintly, as though sensing something sacred was unfolding. The old man had no crown, no throne, only a walking stick carved with the same crest etched into the stones of this mountain. I stood tall, even though everything inside me screamed that I was not enough. I wasn't noble. I wasn't chosen by birth. I was just someone who cared when no one else was watching. Maybe that was all that mattered now. I took a breath and spoke. "You came here not for gold," I began, voice trembling. "Not for power. You came here for something we all carry in our bones." Hope my voice echoed, carried by the wind and the stone. The murmurs in the crowd faded. All eyes rose to me. I was once like you. I lived in the in-between. Not poor, not rich, not known, not forgotten. Just ordinary. But I learned something when I stopped to help a stray dog that day. I paused. A flicker of recognition passed through many faces below. That story had already traveled faster than I imagined. I learned that power doesn't begin when you inherit something. It begins when you give something. I stepped forward to the edge of the platform, spreading my arms slightly, letting them see not just a figure above, but a man they could reach. You will not be taxed for statues. Your children will not be hungry while vaults overflow. You will not be silenced while banners wave. I raised my voice, letting the storm winds push it into every ear. I swear, on this mountain, on the name I have accepted, and on every failure that brought us here, that we will turn this house into a home. Not for me, but for all. A hush lingered for just a second longer. And then a wave of sound erupted. Applause, tears, cheers that seemed to break apart the mist itself. I looked down and saw a woman drop to her knees, sobbing into her scarf. A boy raised a wooden toy in the air. Two old guards embraced each other and looked up as if seeing light for the first time. The dog barked. Just once. Loud and clear. And the old man raised his walking stick high above his head. The sound fell again into silence. He began to climb. It was not a dramatic ascent. It was slow, patient, ceremonial. He stopped on each step and pressed a hand to the stone, whispering something I couldn't hear. Maybe to his ancestors, maybe to his own guilt. When he reached the platform, we stood face to face for the first time since I'd left the mansion. "You did not promise wealth," he said, his voice low and rough. "You promised dignity. That is far harder to keep," I nodded. "I know." He reached into the folds of his coat and withdrew a velvet-wrapped bundle. With hands that had built empires and buried loved ones, he unfolded it carefully and revealed a circlet. It was not gold, nor heavy with diamonds. It was made of tempered iron, forged with simplicity and strength. At its center, a sapphire, deep, stormy, like a drop of night sky caught in metal. He held it in both hands, and without theatrics, without flourish, placed it upon my brow. "You are heir," he said, "not because of blood, because of burden." The crowd below erupted again, but this time not with cheers of triumph. These were cries of release, of renewal. Some knelt, others held hands to hearts. For the first time, this mountain echoed not with authority, but with understanding. I didn't feel powerful. I felt grounded, rooted. For once I was not standing on a cliff. I was standing in my purpose. He turned beside me and lifted both arms. I followed, and together we faced the horizon. And that's when I saw it. Beyond the valley, just past the last visible ridge, the sky had begun to twist. Black clouds gathered, swirling unnaturally fast, forming spirals too perfect to be natural. The old man's arms slowly lowered, his gaze hardening as the wind shifted from proud to ominous. "Not all are ready for compassion," he said. "Some come only to burn what they cannot control." And I realized, my first act as heir was not to build, but to defend. A grand carriage wound down the mountain road at sunset, its wheels grinding gently against cobblestone trails that knew the footsteps of power. Lanterns flickered along the estate's ancient iron gates. burning like stars lighting the path to a destiny I hadn't asked for. The manor stood ahead, its towering windows glowing like eyes that remembered more than they forgave. I adjusted my collar and straightened my spine, prepared for ceremony, unaware of the vendetta waiting to greet me inside. The horses slowed as the manor came into full view, its towers slicing into the dying light of the sky, its flags unmoving as if holding their breath. My hands trembled, but I kept them still. Today was supposed to be a beginning, a formal welcome, a day of honor. But something about the silence made it feel like the beginning of something else, entirely. The guards were the first to appear, lined along the entrance road like statues. Their uniforms were sharp, pressed, and identical. Their boots clicked in perfect harmony as the carriage came to a halt, and they saluted as I stepped down. Their faces held no warmth, only duty. I met their eyes one by one, silently noting which ones blinked and which didn't. The head steward, a man named Varen, whose voice always carried more than his words, stepped forward from the courtyard to announce my arrival. Presenting the named heir, guardian of the crest, steward of the ancestral flame. My title echoed across the stone courtyard. Some bowed their heads, others kept their chins up. I recognized few of them, but their eyes knew me. Inside the grand hall, the air was warm from the braziers, but it did little to ease the chill crawling across my spine. The servants bowed, the torches flickered, and I walked toward the great stair, where tradition said the new heir would be presented to the assembled stewards and advisors of the estate. The hall was filled, not with music or laughter, but with silence, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see how I'd measure up to the name carved above the door. Eternum honoris, honor eternal. At the top of the stair, I turned to face the gathered council. It was the first time I'd seen them all together. The economic steward, the head of security, the land manager, the high librarian, the envoy to the western estates. Their robes differed in color and cut, but their expressions were eerily similar, tired, guarded, calculating. The old man had prepared me for this, but not completely. He'd said once, as we stared into the fire, "Power isn't inherited. It's tested, over and over, until you either become it or are consumed by it." The ceremony was brief. Words were said, vows spoken. A cup of oath wine passed between hands. And then, the true ritual began. The first council meeting. In the vaulted chamber beneath a ceiling, painted with the legends of those who came before, I sat in the high-backed chair that once belonged to the founder. I didn't feel powerful. I felt trapped in the gaze of painted ghosts and living enemies. The stewards began their reports. Land was in dispute with the southern border. Traders were threatening to abandon our markets if tariffs weren't reduced. The water supply to the eastern farms was mysteriously drying out. Each report came with facts and loaded glances. Then came the whispers. Not words, but gestures, glances, murmurs behind steepled fingers. I caught one advisor passing a folded note to another behind a goblet. Another shifted uncomfortably each time the phrase, "heir's discretion," was spoken. I leaned toward the old man, who had chosen to sit behind me rather than beside me. His gaze didn't flicker from the chamber, but his words came low and cold. Trust no one but your heart. And even then, test it twice. He stood and exited before I could ask what he meant. The meeting ended just before twilight. The council dispersed. I walked the empty halls of the manor alone, escorted only by silence. My own footsteps became the loudest voice in a house that once roared with life. Every painting seemed to lean forward, waiting to see what kind of man I would become. Back in my chamber, a fire had been lit, though I hadn't summoned anyone. A tray of wine and bread rested on the table, but something else waited beside it. A box, black, sealed with red wax, no emblem, no inscription. I approached it cautiously. My instinct screamed, As I broke the seal and opened the box, I recoiled slightly. Inside lay a white glove, elegant in shape, but soaked in blood. A stark, fresh stain that hadn't yet dried. The glove had a diamond clasp, twisted and broken, symbol of house duels, challenge, war. Inside the glove was a folded piece of parchment. Your rule ends at midnight. That was all it said. A sudden knock came at the door. I turned, but no one was there. When I stepped into the hall, a gust of wind blew from the far corridor. The sconces flickered, and down below, in the lower court, torches began to flare, lit not by servants, but by masked figures moving in sync. The conspiracy hadn't just arrived. It had always been here. Silence hung thick in the air as I clutched the bloodied glove, its broken clasp cold against my skin. Down in the courtyard, shadows moved like soldiers, torches blazing as if announcing war. Behind me, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, and not alone. From the painted halls to the vaulted council room, a plan had already been set in motion. And now, on the very night of my succession, they were ready to see it through. Torches flared violently, casting monstrous shadows that leapt across the manor's ancient marble columns. Outside, the night was still, but inside, chaos surged like a dam had cracked. Armored boots thundered through stained glass corridors, shattering color and silence in equal measure. I stood in the heart of it all, heirloom blade drawn, heart steady, as a cloaked figure hissed from the darkness. "Prove you're right." The scream of metal on metal cut through the stillness of the throne chamber as the doors burst open. Guards I had never appointed swarmed in, their faces hidden behind black steel visors, their swords already stained. Their presence wasn't a challenge. It was a verdict. I raised the blade gifted to me atop the mountain, the founder's edge still gleaming with sacred memory. This weapon had crowned kings, protected legacies, and today, it would test mine. The first blade came fast. I parried without thought, the clang echoing through the domed ceiling like a church bell warning the heavens. Sparks flew. My body moved from instinct, each step backward a refusal to yield. From the hallways, I heard more shouts, metal clashing with marble, boots stomping toward the eastern wings. The coup wasn't isolated. It was coordinated. I was the centerpiece in a play that had been rehearsed for generations. A traitor in noble red charged toward me, sword raised high. I recognized him, Lord Calwyn. Once a childhood tutor, now a hungry blade. "You were never worthy," he snarled. "I didn't ask to be," I answered, and then met his swing with a cry that came from somewhere deeper than rage. Our swords collided. His foot slipped on the polished floor, and I sent him sprawling down the dais with a twist of my blade. In the distance, a horn sounded, low and hollow. Not mine. This was their signal. More would come. I turned, sprinting through the eastern corridor, shouting over my shoulder. "To arms!" Loyal guards to the heir's side. Silence. Then, echoes of movement. Not all who wore armor had sold their oaths. As I reached the central tower stairs, a group of my own, 6 in number, rounded the base. Their captain, a woman with an old scar across her brow, locked eyes with me and nodded. "We've been waiting, my lord." They fell into step without question. Through the halls we went, corridors stained with firelight and blood. The stained glass windows shattered one by one as arrows struck from the outside and torchlight poured in. My lungs burned, my arms ached, but my grip on the blade never loosened. In the upper gallery, more traitors awaited. One raised a crossbow, too slow. I ducked behind a pillar and charged, slamming into him with my shoulder and driving my elbow into his throat. He fell, gasping. Another leapt from the shadows, and we traded 3 furious strikes before I found his hip with a downward slash. From the balcony, I saw the courtyard below, lit up with torches like a festival of fire. Dozens moved in formation. This wasn't a rebellion. It was a replacement, and I was the obstacle. As we pressed toward the high battlements, a flicker of motion caught my eye. A wheelchair. The old man. He had emerged from a hidden lift I'd never seen used. Alone, wheeled by his own trembling hands, eyes locked on me through the smoke and chaos. "Hold fast," he called, voice like breaking stone. "This is your trial." My feet faltered, but only for a heartbeat. He pointed to the tower's edge where a thick iron bell hung, one rung only during siege. I raised the hammer beside it and struck. Boom! The sound exploded across the grounds. Loyalists, those not yet dead or bought, would know what it meant. Defend. The estate was under internal fire. A fresh wave came through the west door. This one faster, cleaner, their blades trained, their eyes burning. My guards pushed ahead, intercepting them with steel and bone. I found myself locked in a duel with a man dressed in priest's robes. He moved like a dancer. His strikes were elegant, but his face held no mercy. "You were supposed to die a symbol," he said, "not become a storm." We fought for what felt like hours in moments. Finally, I kicked his leg out, brought my blade up, and froze. He grinned. "You hesitate." "That's why we'll win." I drove my sword through his robe before the grin could fade. One by one, we reclaimed the halls. My guards fell. 1, 2, 3, until only 2 remained at my side. I was bleeding now. Left arm. Right shoulder. But my blade still sang. The final confrontation came at the Grand Hall. 20 men stood in a crescent. Traitors, nobles, guards, old advisors who had once smiled in silence. Behind them, masked figures moved like shadows, silent, unhurried, watching. The air was thick with smoke and betrayal. Then clarion trumpets from the South Tower. Reinforcements, the ones who had stayed true. A second group of loyal guards burst through the servant halls, trapping the traitors in between. I raised my sword and roared. My voice cracked the tension, and we surged forward. Steel met steel. Blood met stone. Fire met legacy. And then, silence. As the last blade clattered to the ground, and the final traitor collapsed beside my boots, I leaned against the stone column, panting. The old man wheeled forward, his face pale but eyes burning bright. "You held," he said. "You bled, but you held." He handed me a scroll, its seal still wet, the wax dripping down its sides like blood. "A royal decree," he whispered. "Not for here. For the world beyond, my time as protector had begun, but my legacy, it would be forged in lands I had never seen. A sunrise summit perched high above the earth stretched before me, where shadows of nations merged with dawn's promise. Below, flags of countless lands rippled in the breeze, some tattered by trials, others freshly raised in fragile hope. I lifted the family blade, the same ancient steel once drawn in battle, now catching light as a symbol of compassion forged anew. "This is our covenant," I vowed, voice steady, and soul lit with resolve. The platform beneath my feet felt like the world's pivot point. Each envoy assembled, representatives from famine-stricken isles, students freed from war-torn cities, diplomats from drought-rifled plains, gathered not beneath crowns, but under a shared call. They had come looking for solutions, not someone to rule them. They found a steward. I glanced at the open ledgers displayed behind me. Digital, transparent, designed so any citizen could see where funds moved, how aid was distributed, and who carried stewardship. No shadows, no hidden margins, just coalitions of trust, built openly. "My title is Chief Steward of Hope," I declared, watching the multilingual translators echo words into at least 4 tongues. Murmurs of hope drifted through the crowd. Espoir, amour, nadezhda. It cascaded across cultures as a bridge rather than a slogan. I paused, letting the term sink in. Just years ago, I was a stranger, clutching a dog's trembling paw under an alley's flickering lamp, unaware that compassion would follow me to the summit. That whimper had been the seed. I blinked, and the summit shifted in memory to a damp alley, muddy rain pooling, the dog's eyes large and broken-made human. I had knelt with no burden but empathy. That moment became the fulcrum of legacy, the spark that revealed the stone of truth buried under greed. The crowd stilled as I continued. We are not here to offer alms. We are here to build systems, to rebuild trust, to prove that the world's pain is not a currency, it is a covenant. I looked into desperate eyes, mother protecting her child, scholar with faded ink-stained hands, elder with calloused palms. They weren't moving me with pity. They were conjuring in me the person I was meant to be. Beside me, the old man watched in silence. The summit lights danced across his richly lined face. He never stood. He had bowed in the summit chamber earlier, his final bow. There was no fanfare, just dignity. In his presence, I felt years of guardianship release itself, like wings retreating after long wear. I pressed forward. Let our relief fund be open to audits. Let our vaults be vessels of trust. Let the sword we raise be not for war, but for promise. A tear slid down the cheek of an envoy from a land scarred by famine. Another placed her palm over her heart in gratitude. Lions and lambs alike watched each other, not as predators or prey, but as partners under the same dawn. The breeze carried my vow upward, across continents. As applause echoed around me, my comm device buzzed to life. The crystal-dropped silence of the summit turned brittle. SOS from the Polar Research Post Alpha 7, a clipped voice relayed. Coordinates flashed, frosted, blinking, urgent. I turned to the old man. His eyes, once clouded by age, now burned with an almost vivid clarity. He smiled, the vaguest curve of hope fulfilled. That coordinate, icy, remote, made something clear. The world would always demand compassion, always wait for the next crisis. And I had chosen to be its steward, not its king. The summit faded behind me. Ahead, an endless horizon of need. Applause still thundered through the gathering, even as I watched the blinking coordinates. I met the old man's knowing smile, one that said, "I was never meant to finish." You are beyond the summit's glow. I saw storm clouds gathering across distant poles. Their call, urgent, icy, spoke less of disaster, more of duty. And with that, the beginning of my global legacy truly began. If this story moved you, don't let the journey end here. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because every next chapter unfolds right here. Leave your thoughts in the comments and share the video so others can join this legacy. Your support lights the path to the next mission.